Hello, everyone. So happy you could all join us for this virtual discussion on Students Deserve Privacy Too. To get started, we're going to do some quick introductions. So, hello, my name is Juliana Cotto. I'm a policy counsel for the Future of Privacy Forum, which is a nonprofit organization focused on how emerging technologies affect consumer privacy. And I'm on the Youth and Education Privacy team. So, we work to protect child and student privacy while also allowing for equitable data and technology use. So now I'm also going to have our discussants introduce themselves, starting with Ezra Hesse.
Hi, I'm Ezra Hesse. I'm a third-year undergraduate student at Indiana University, studying psychology, but also minoring in criminal justice and sociology. I was a Schoolhouse Connection scholar in 18, as well as a Cox Legacy scholar, and I think that both of these uh, organizations have allowed me to learn more about the inequalities that students face and how everyone, but especially people in my position now, are able to help.
Thanks, Ezra. And we also have Patricia Julianelle.
Thanks, Juliana. I'm Patricia. I am from Schoolhouse Connection, like Azraet. Schoolhouse Connection is an impact organization working nationally on issues of federal policy, state policy, and practical assistance to schools and service providers, particularly on the issue of students experiencing homelessness from birth all the way up through higher education. So our favorite program is our Youth Leadership and Scholarship Program, which is how I know Azraet. And we also certainly have a lot of work that we do related to privacy of student records for those who are highly mobile and experiencing homelessness.
Thanks, Patricia. And last but not least, we have Chris Wood with us.
Hello, my name is Christopher Wood. I'm the executive director and co-founder of LGBT Tech, a national organization working at the intersection of LGBT community and technology, really focusing in on research and how technology really works within the LGBTQ community. And we use that research to inform our education work as well as our programmatic work, like distributing technology to hundreds of thousands of individuals across the country.
Awesome. So before diving into our conversation, I wanted to ground our discussion with some important context and statistics. So schools are on their 12th month of distance or hybrid learning. And throughout this entire time, community members have had to continuously change on a dime how education is being delivered. A report conducted by the Bellwether Education Partners estimates anywhere between 1 to 3 million students in the US possibly haven't attended school since pandemic closures in March. There are also critical equity implications for students of color, specifically for Black students, where the Black community has been hit the hardest by COVID. And much more recently, there's been a wave of news on how this pandemic is affecting the mental health and social emotional well-being of students. So, for example, about 40% of LGBTQ youth have seriously considered attempting suicide, according to a national survey conducted by the Trevor Project. A national CDC survey of high school students found that students experiencing homelessness are more than 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than house students. And very much more recently, a surge of student suicides pushed some Las Vegas schools to reopen. So I thought it was important to ground ourselves in this context and these stats because it shows that there's a justifiable need to better address students and to respond to a crisis that's exacerbating racial and other inequities. It's pushed schools to adopt particular technologies or policies to try to keep students safe and also provide meaningful education during distance learning. But at the same time, these efforts can be at odds with student privacy or maybe overshadow student privacy concerns. So the purpose of our discussion today is to identify where student privacy is not being considered when it should, while understanding that push and pull that this crisis has created. So starting with Chris and then going around, what is your main concern right now regarding how student privacy is maybe not protected during these times?
For students, they're really facing a challenging time right now, especially if you're in a minority community like the LGBTQ community. Not having reliable internet, coupled with not having a social outlet, not being able to engage in extracurricular activities, whether that be sports or theater, the things where you really connect with friends, and the activities that really keep youth inspired. those natural outlets are not necessarily built in there. And so therefore, you're relying on things like online and trying to connect with friends and people that you relate to in an environment that has been overly increasingly challenging. If you don't have reliable internet, or you don't have reliable connection, or maybe you only have one computer in the house, or a limited amount of space to actually get online and have open conversation with people that you would normally have an open conversation in a hallway with. And so as more activities are moving online, especially in the classroom, the time is extremely limited for those students to interact with their core support group or support network. And as that is being more and more monitored by schools in various ways, all the way from filtering of content and information on the internet on maybe school loan devices, all the way to in the classroom, where the teacher is able to see and monitor everything that a student is doing, whether in that class or potentially whenever they're using that section or for that class in the computer. So I'm extremely concerned in the fact that although maybe most of the time the students wouldn't mind or don't mind having someone kind of watching them, make sure they're staying on track, there's all those cases where the teacher and the administrators are able to see a lot more than what they otherwise would, because of missing the time of just passing in the hallway and having that face-to-face connection. And that's really concerning. It doesn't allow students to have that moment of fleeting conversation with a peer that they trust or an administrator that they really trust, and just having a moment of confiding in them. And that's really, I think, has been detrimental over the last 12 months for especially our LGBTQ individuals that are currently seeking resources outside of their own biological home.
Thanks, Chris, for sharing. I think that definitely resonates. And speaking to kind of the increase in monitoring and surveillance, Patricia, what are your concerns there, either in that topic area or another way?
Sure. For students experiencing homelessness, they are almost guaranteed to be using school supplied technology. They're very unlikely to have their own computer, even their own internet connection. So to the extent that schools are monitoring the activities of students online, certainly our students who are experiencing homelessness, those in foster care, students of color, low income, they're much more likely to be subjected to that monitoring because of the equipment they're using. So I'm definitely concerned about that. I also really, what Chris is saying about those conversations that happen in the hallway and how that impacts student mental health. It's a little bit easier to walk up to a teacher after class that you've developed a relationship, that you've known, and have a quick conversation with them, and get something off your chest or open up a door to something that you might need. That's a lot easier than doing that online, typing it into an email, typing it into a chat, even texting it. Anything in writing is so much more real. And even if you're doing it over video, our students experiencing homelessness tend to live in very overcrowded situations. There might be 10 or 12 people in the room where they're trying to communicate with the teacher. They might be in a motel room with a lot of people around them. So trying to have a conversation with a teacher or a professional online, and you have all these people listening, watching, even if you have a headset, so maybe they can't hear what you're being told, they can still hear what you're saying. Privacy is a huge issue for academics, for mental health, and it really has taken a lot of self-determination away from students. And again, especially the kind of students that we work with at Schoolhouse Connection, who have so much of their lives in upheaval. They have so little control in general over what might be happening to them on a day-to-day basis, that to have another element of their privacy and their self-determination taken away from them, it's really a self-esteem issue. It's a mental health issue. It's an academic issue. It's something very serious that I think we're going to be coping with for a long time.
Thank you, Patricia. And Ezra, as a current student, these concerns about student monitoring and surveillance, have you experienced that? Do you have similar concerns for how that's been implemented?
Yeah, I really do. When you talk about video mandates and the possibility of having your personal life put out there, whether it's because you're in double situations, or maybe situations, or maybe you're just sad. You are not doing well mentally, and it shows, and you're wearing that mental health on your face. The request for live classes is very intrusive, especially when that video mandate can also be related to points in the class because it's related to attendance. Because simple things like other students being able to pin your video while a live class is occurring, not only does it feel like video mandates are super distracting to the classroom environment, but very intrusive into the lives of the students. And when you feel like you can get called out for what you're doing on your video, getting called out for eating breakfast or not looking like you're attentive enough on your video, you simply just don't want to feel like people are intruding your space. Super worrisome on top, and that's at the collegiate level, and where some of us are able to have more of our own devices, but it's concerning to think about personal lives being monitored, and that could out people for reaching out for resources. It's really scary.
Thank you for touching on that. And we also talked about another theme a little bit about having private conversations, or how do you have private conversations virtually? How do you seek help virtually? So Chris, I was wondering if you could speak to that. Say LGBTQ students had, a student group that they would seek services from, or a teacher that they would. How do they now kind of have a private conversation if maybe their family members aren't familiar with their sexual or gender identity?
The short answer is it doesn't happen often. You have a lot of individuals connecting over text with maybe administrators or some sort of text-based, maybe it's email or something like that. Again, as Patricia pointed out, it's not very personal. It's a lot harder to type that out and actually connect. It's putting something in writing, as where before it was an opportunity just to have a quick conversation, get something off the chest, maybe even say something and put it out there to see how someone responds. All of that has now kind of shifted away. I think it's also important to realize that actually there's a lot of teachers within schools that are supportive resources for LGBTQ, but there's also something called gay straight alliances. But even in our country, only about 3 states in the country have gay straight alliances in at least half of the high schools. So that means 45 states, including and DC, do not have gay straight alliances in the high schools, or it's less than half of the high schools in the state have them. And so by being disconnected from from that daily interaction in school, where you may stumble across an educator, maybe a teacher you've never had and will never have, but just the fact that they have a simple rainbow flag or a rainbow sticker in the corner of their door, that's kind of gone. And it's really hard for students to therefore connect with the adults and the administrators that they're supposed to look to for support. And so then they're looking to their fellow students. They're looking to support groups online, like on Facebook or TikTok, or they're looking for idols that they can then talk to online, which may or may not be safe. Their parents may or may not know. And so we're seeing a huge issue here. Some GSAs, some school districts have really been able to figure out, okay, we still need to hold time for these students. We need to make sure that there's a Zoom call that they can join privately. But as you alluded to, it doesn't take away the fact that if they're not supported in the home, or if the adults in the home don't know, or the adults that are supporting that child don't know, and the child fears coming out or fears revealing that because of maybe what they've heard in the home, then it becomes even more challenging, because it's the student is not going to participate in any type of call or phone call or voice chat or video call where they feel like they may be exposed to something they're not ready to talk
And Patricia, going to you and circling back to the monitoring and surveillance of data, what are you specifically concerned about, thinking about students who are experiencing homelessness? What could happen by surveilling their devices and tracking maybe website activity or searches? What are you particularly concerned about there?
Yeah, every school district and charter school in the country has a legal obligation to remove barriers to enrollment and full participation and retention in school for students experiencing homelessness. And some of those barriers are obvious, like you need to make sure they can enroll, they can fill out the enrollment paperwork, you need to make sure they have a device and a hotspot if their school's in distance learning. Those things are kind of obvious, and I think schools are aware of that. But when you think about barriers to participation and barriers to staying in school, um, from the perspective of a student, feeling like you're being watched, feeling like if I want to Google something about domestic violence, or I want to Google something about shelters or where to go for food, and I think that someone at my school might know this, they might be able to access this information that I've been just doing simple Google searches to try to find resources for myself or my family, that might be really humiliating for me. It might be intimidating. It might be frightening. In small communities, there might be people at the school who have personal relationships with my parents outside of school. I might worry about my peers finding out. So that really might infringe a student's willingness to try to get information on a computer. And it also might really make them feel distanced from school. It might make them feel like, this isn't a place that's really a safe or comfortable place for me anymore. So I'm definitely concerned about that. We've also seen schools really wanting to try to connect students and families to resources right now with so many places closed. And they've been asking questions about, well, can we just send a list of our homeless students to this church that wants to provide food? Or can we send a list to this community organization that has some money for transportation or clothing or PPE? And we've really been trying to be very clear that no, don't send by name lists of your students experiencing homelessness to community agencies. That's against the law. And it also, again, is really taking that self-determination away from parents and students who might not want anyone to know about their situation. So it's great to offer those resources. We love that. We encourage that. It's wonderful when schools want to do that. Just ask, just say, even by text, hey, can we send your information over to this church that's doing some outreach? And someone can even text back a consent for that release. And the Department of Ed said, we'll accept electronic consents because we understand the reality that we're in. So, just ask, just have a conversation with a student or with a parent.
And so, Ezra, your perspective, if in high school you found out there was a list going around of possible students who are experiencing homelessness, how would that make you feel?
When I think about the idea of a list going around that outs somebody as homeless or in foster care or whatnot, I like to equate it to what if you were to send out a list of all the students going through a divorce to all of the resources that your school had available and to all of the teachers. So all of the teachers knew exactly what was going on, and everyone, I think, would hear that and go, oh, that's silly. We would never do that. But why isn't that the reaction that people have to sending out such personal information? And this gets back to that idea of there being so few interpersonal connections being made these days. There's so few opportunities for it. And it makes me so uncomfortable to think that people would really reduce the existence of students and their families to, oh, you checked off this box, so we're going to send you here. And it makes it so much less personal. And like Patricia said, just sending a quick text message is the littlest thing that we can do right now to make sure that we're not depersonalizing the care that these families are receiving. Because what we should be doing is encouraging the simulation of those interpersonal connections that we used to have more often when we had a more traditional learning environment and whatnot.
And you kind of touched on this in Chris and Patricia as well. But Ezra, what communication do you think is happening to students from teachers or faculty of if whether or not your device is being surveilled? Like, have you been told anything about monitoring of devices? Yeah, what communication do you believe is happening?
I am aware of when our lockdown browsers are used. I'm aware of when we're supposed to be monitored, but it wasn't until I did more digging and having conversations with professionals like Chris where I understood the potential that these services have to collect student information. And what I think is important to point out is that I was uncomfortable with the surveillance going on even before I realized the potential it had to be far, far too intrusive.
Thank you. And I definitely want to end with practical tips and ways that educators, school staff, professors can really think about these privacy risks and mitigate and just kind of weigh, the benefits against the harms when implementing different policies or technologies. So starting with Chris, what tips or recommendations do you have?
So first and foremost, you have no idea what's going on in someone's life, especially a student's. And with this type of monitoring software, with this type of monitoring and blocking software that's happening and being used in schools, it's important to recognize that those tools have given you an abundance of privilege that should not be abused, and privilege that should be very well respected in respect of that person. And so never trying to assume that you understand what's going on, never trying to assume that you understand the best path forward for that individual, but more of being mindful about how you're approaching the individual and what privilege you've been given if you do happen to see something, to have a open conversation or set aside some time to really talk with that student. And if they're not willing to talk, then understand that that's not your place and to step away, unless it's mandated by what you're supposed to report in a school system. But if the student doesn't want to talk, then that's their right, and you need to respect that. But also ensuring that you're doing it in a way that's going to be very helpful to them and not put them in an awkward position, maybe in front of classmates, or in any way do something that's going to set them apart in a way that would make them feel uncomfortable.
Thank you, Chris. And I definitely heard still not to lose that human relationship despite maybe being in an entirely virtual setting. Patricia, any recommendations or tips to give?
Yeah, I would say remember that homelessness, foster care, these are all situations, not identities, and they're all situations that are protected educational records. And so we cannot share that information. So wanting to help is fantastic. We salute that. But like Chris said, ask, have a conversation. If you wouldn't want something done to you or to your information, then students and families probably also don't want that done to them or their information.
Great, thank you. And Azarette, to end from a student perspective, what tips, thoughts to share?
The call out culture of having information, just like Chris said, it having that information is something that should be respected. And right now, it often feels like it is lorded over people and used to call people out rather than used to reach out with people, rather than used as a little piece of the puzzle to bridge a gap between administrators and students. And if we could get away from that, which I think is what we've been saying this whole time, both respecting the protected identities, but also generally personalizing our interactions again.
Awesome, thank you so much. So Azarette and Chris, thank you for your time today. And for everyone watching, we hope we provided some useful insight to you all. And if you would like to learn more about the work our organizations do, Please look us up on Twitter and our websites, which we can post here. Awesome. So we have a privacy forum, privacy company's website, where we host kind of a one-stop shop for all student privacy resources. LGBT Tech, you can follow them on Twitter, and Schoolhouse Connection, we have their website and Twitter as well. So thank you all again for joining our discussion today.